the community college has always got a dual mission.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, it's a vocational technical school. On the other, it's an entry into the university. That's a very schizophrenic role. And they don't have, and that's also an economic situation, they haven't the resources to split out, nor can you always know, to split out college prep or university prep from trade.
Right.
And some kid might walk in with trade and discover something that lights him or her up, and boom, off to the university. And some kid might come in with the university and decides, well, damn, I'd rather be doing this set of skills. I'm having much more fun. I mean, so given this kind of dual mission that community colleges have, it's hard to situate the student.
I think that what we have at the community colleges that was so complicated is we don't just have basic writing per se. We have basic writings, and they're not talking to each other.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, the pedagogy is problematic because of the material conditions, and like you were saying, they're not necessarily trained in writing pedagogy. I mean, in a lot of cases you have, especially in the ABE, you have people, I mean, I've seen places where, if you have a bachelor's, they will hire you. Because that assumption is just that language is transparent, and if you know how to write, you can teach people how to write, which of course we know is not the case.
The kind of state mandates that say remedial education is the job of the community college, first of all, dilutes the community college and relegates the community college to some sort of damn nursing school, when in fact it has a very clear and important mission, which is a lot more than fixing students that need remedies.
I was really kind of baffled to sort of wrap my head around all of these requirements that community colleges have about reporting of student success, reporting of student data, and the kind of pressures that they were under, that we are under, that I think is very different at a four-year school. And I think that's changing for four-year schools too. But community colleges are really expected to see, like sort of where the entire student is going. And we are not really thought to have quite as much control over our classrooms, for better and for worse. Community colleges tend to be very flexible. We change far more quickly than four-year schools. I think it's in our DNA. Just sort of the way that we evolved as a certain institution type. And because faculty are not doing research, this is one upside of not being expected to do research, we are often very deeply engaged in sort of just the matters of the institution. We serve on a lot of committees. We tend to have a less top-down approach, I think, in that, we interact regularly with our chairs and our deans.
What I had to argue, first of all, is that what we're talking about is not remediation, or even developmental. What we are talking about is a cultural shift. That the students that we address in basic writing are students who have not been culturally prepared to go to the university, and thereby didn't acquire even the nominal literacy skills that our normal or conventional, traditional 101 students had. The new teacher needs to discard, shed the social worker mentality. We are teachers. We are not here to help the poor unfortunates. We are here to impart a certain kind of literacy. And this is a problem I ran into as a graduate student teaching. As a graduate student, when I was first put in charge of a basic writing program, I was a graduate student. And what had happened was, and of course the black and Latino kids kind of globbed onto me mainly, and the mainly is because at that time I didn't know any American Indian students that took Flagstaff, and and the Asian American students I didn't see. And I don't think it was model minority stuff. It just, they had their own connections, their own networks. Nevertheless, what they came to complain to me about was the degree to which they got A's in their basic writing classes, and then were getting C's and D's afterwards, when they thought they had acquired everything. See, that comes out of that social work mentality. And the Spanish word is pobrecito, poor little thing. The students will get out of it what they want to get out of it. That's not our call. But our call is to recognize that this is a set of skills and that the students already have an inherent capability. Mm-hmm. And often a greater flexibility with that capability than the teachers themselves.
I don't think anyone intends it this way, but, essentially what happened after I spent some time in my new job at the community college is that I realized that these students didn't see themselves as victims.
Right.
We're not interested in, well, I don't want to put a blanket, statement over all of them, but maybe what I'm trying to say is that I'm not sure that the language that we use intellectually in our conversations in graduate school, the ideas are really important, and they form who we are, and they form how we see these students, and they are useful. But that when it comes to translating this to students, any student, undergraduate, anywhere, I'm not sure that we can always, that those conversations are always directly applicable.
So, for me, basic writing is not the place of kind of pre-college or space, but it's really a place where they're trying out the same things that are happening in first-year composition, but it's happening in ways that, for one, demystify those academic conventions, and then two, it's much more attention to pedagogy, because a key part of basic writing, myth, lore, belief, value, is that students, those traditional we talked about this yesterday, right? The traditional pedagogies don't work for them, and so. And again, I'd argue that they probably don't work for most students, right? But some students can get by.
Yeah.
A huge phenomenon is you have lit people coming in who don't have much experience teaching writing, right. And what do? They do literary analysis, right? And there's no focus on the writing conventions or the
in their one-on-one classroom,
right?
That's what they do.
Or you have the other one where it's just we're just doing writing and we may read a little bit, or you just go read what you like and then we'll do it right here. But it's really bringing this back, and I think that gets back to what you're saying in terms of that source use focus, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I'd say two things. There's a couple ways to kind of come at that. Certainly you can always use the text as a way to have them reflecting on that. So, if they talk about, especially if you've got literacy as a kind of theme for the course, right? Uh-huh. But I think, and maybe this is what you're getting at, that there's also a way to push that where they recognize it in their own writing. Yeah. Not just as kind of doing rhetorical analysis of the powerful use of Rodriguez's writing, but how do I do that? And so I think one way to do it is for them to be thinking about the different effects of the writing on different audiences.
Yeah.
Right? And also maybe thinking about privileged or non-privileged spaces as writers. Right? I mean, who gets heard and why?
Yeah.
Why do you get heard or why don't you get heard? In which, in which spaces and which contexts, and how does that then reflect a little bit more of a complicated understanding of the power or uses of language?
Often when people in four-year schools, and especially a lot of theorists, when they're writing about basic writers, we may not be talking about the same environment. Depending on where you're teaching, some students are walking in with a fifth grade reading level.
Right.
And are they bright? Absolutely. Do they have potential? Of course they do. But why would we assign a graduate level text? I mean, that's just ridiculous.
It took me a while to figure this out, right? Yeah. Because I do this because I want to affect change, because I think that writing in particular, and especially basic writing, is, it's political work and it's social justice work. It's not just teaching punctuation. But yeah, you've got to have those backdoor ways into those politics, So I finally figured out, I can't just do a class on race theme or gender theme or whatever. You have to have issues or popular culture, and then you bring in these politics, and that allows the students to come to that awareness, and then you're there to facilitate it rather than to soapbox it.
I just think that my students are far more aware of these issues and don't need us to kind of tell them that they should be concerned about race. And I guess that's what I wonder, I mean, I still think that we need to give students, we need to let students know that this conversation is important to us in academia, and that, but I just feel like at a community college, students take so much more for granted. You don't have to tell them that there's inequality. Do you know what I mean? Like, to me, I think that's probably might be insulting.
If you look at it in its historical context, basic writing scholarship and its kind of development in the field really affected the kind of norm of first-year composition, right? Because it was very much, like Lou and Horner, and Bartholomew, and a lot of what they were, and even Shaughnessy, what they were talking about there was kind of basic best practices, and how do we demystify these expectations for our students, rather than just assuming they come in already masters of this thing we're going to evaluate them on. He looks at he does a great critique of that system, but what he doesn't recognize is that it's not intentional, I think, right? So he looks at it and says, and some people would argue that it is intentional. And I guess I do see that in terms of intentional on the broader scale of kind of the political economy of the U.S. Economic system, right? Definitely it's that. Right. But I think the other way to look at it is recognize that these are kind of consequences of implementations, which is much more kind of looking at it. It complicates it kind of through a Gramsci approach, right, in terms of the contradictions of hegemony. But so he looks at it and says that these are containment tracks meant to keep people from economic. He actually talks about, because the economy is so bad, let's just keep people spinning their wheels in these courses and whatnot.
I really think that there is a gross misunderstanding of what legitimate acceleration programs do. I think these are not based in reality, and so, we would be just as concerned if we felt like we were squeezing students out. But the reality is that the status quo squeezes students out in a completely different but completely similarly insidious way, right? Students don't complete these sequences. There's absolutely no doubt about that. They do not, in 8-year cycles, they don't complete these sequences. Right. And so, does that mean we should keep things the same way, or that we shouldn't try something that is new? And I do think that folks will find that these acceleration projects are aiming to solve that exact problem. Some of the best research I think that is happening right now is actually from the Community College Resource Center, which is at Columbia University, and is not affiliated with NAID or Journal of Basic Writing or anything like that. They put out a lot of research that sort of does large-scale quantitative studies, and not everybody likes what they find. But I think what they're doing that's extremely important is that they are looking at the big picture of remedial, developmental, basic education and taking a hard look. Their studies are not perfect, but no study is perfect. But I think they're doing probably the most comprehensive research today on the ineffectiveness of community colleges in basic writing. And I don't think that this is stuff that JBW is willing to look at, and NAID is clearly scared by it.
What I did with it was say, we will do the traditional 101 more slowly. I'm not going to give them dummy down. There's surely not drills for skills.
Right.
And surely not grammar. Because, and that really shows up when you look at ESL students who know the grammar inside out, but they still don't understand the literary culture
Right.
Of our discourse, our rhetorics.
Right.
And more often than not, don't even know to think in terms of differences in rhetorics.
I also think that most students are there because they had placement tests that identified their use of grammar as insufficient.
Right.
And so for us to say, well, we shouldn't be teaching grammar, I've always struggled with that.
Right.
And grammar is what they're going to be judged on.
Yeah.
Still. Those other things are important, but they're still going to be judged on their grammar. So we need to address that assumption that all of us at community college are teaching grammar in these horrible, reductive ways.
Yeah.
And it's like, hello, people, we live in 2013 too, and we've been trained this way too. So don't make an assumption that we are simply, reinforcing the system.
The crisis of error in basic writing. It's not so. We tend to the dichotomy between, we don't want to respond to what's perceived as error because we don't want to shut the student down, or we have to be the grammar Nazi and correct every. And I don't think it's that's a kind of false dilemma, because I think that definitely you do want to still pay attention to conventions, and you need to, the students need and want particulars in that dominant discourse, but that doesn't mean that the way you go about doing that is, the red line every other word, but rather, again, in the same way that you're kind of trying to find, you work to find a logic for the students in their prose or the ideas, find a logic in the error. There's often, it's not often the errors are made randomly. There are typos, granted,
right.
But in general, students tend to make the same errors,
Right.
and there's a pattern there. More and more, I will do little mini lessons, but always in the context of their writing.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
So we'll talk about sentence fragments, and then I'll have folks go and look into their drafts or something like that. But yeah, so the first time we do pattern of error logs, I have them track them through the semester. So every time I turn a paper back, they have to record one of their errors, and so they have to kind of identify the error. Well, I've identified it for them. They have to figure out what the rule is, find it in the handbook, and then write down what the rule is, and then they need to fix, and then they have to do a kind of reminder to themselves.
Okay.
So something that helps them remember their particular angle on why this is how they make this error or something.